It seems one of the main focuses of implementation that I've seen is round up all the paper and incorporate it into the EMR. In other words, paper is the enemy. Let's make a catalog of all the paper forms and lists that you use, and the implementation is done when all the paper is absorbed into the system. How does that go wrong, and what do you think about that approach?
Well, the problem you run into with all of the paper today, you look at, if I could take 12 documents today that the physician is using, I may be able to convert all those 12 documents into 2 pieces of screen real estate, because a lot of the data is repeated. If I don't go through that analysis and figure out all that, I may not create the right, again, workflow around what that practice really wants to do. And once I have this piece of paper, who does the information go to? For instance, a lab result. When a lab result comes in, what is your policy? The policy is, if it's a normal lab, then maybe it goes to the nurse just to review and call the patient. If it's an abnormal lab, maybe it goes to the doctor first, or it may go to the nurse, to the physician, and then maybe the physician gives it back to the nurse. That's a workflow process. Again, abnormal lab result or a normal lab result, what is the policy and procedure for handling that? That is rarely ever discussed in an implementation. They basically say, here's the product, how do you want to do it? And if you've never used that software before, your people may not know the answer to that.
So the doctor, when he goes and talks to the reference, the existing user of the software, perhaps instead of saying, why do you like the software, perhaps more, why did you like the implementation? How did that go?
How did the implementation go? What did you learn? What would you have done differently about the implementation? And I was actually at a conference about a month ago, and they had, I think it was 6 different physician groups talking about how they implemented the system. Of the 6, 5 of them said, oh, the first implementation was terrible. We had to redo the whole thing. So here you got 5 out of the 6 saying implementation failed the first time. They went back in, looked at their workflow, looked at different things, and implemented a second time. So all 6 of these were very successful implementations at the end, but 5 of them had to redo it. So I guess that was the question. What did we learn? Oh, we would have done a lot more analysis up front. You know, we would have done things differently, and that's what you're trying to learn. What are best practices? And maybe learn from some of these groups that failed the first time and got it right the second time. I think there needs to be a good, long conversation just about implementation. I think there are a lot of great products out there. And, in our database, we have 386 EMR vendors that we know about. And every one of those vendors has probably at least 1 or 2 very successful implementations. So all the products work. So you got to make sure the product meets your requirements, but it's not just functionality. It's about how well that product is going to work 3 months, 6 months, or a year after buying it. I don't care how great the product is. If it doesn't work for the practice, in this case, you never learn how to drive the car, you're going to have accidents and people are going to fail.
What can we say to vendors to make this better?
Well, I think most of the vendors I've talked to agree that more work needs to be done around that. Their comments are the physicians won't pay for it. They just want to find the right product at the right price. They won't pay for that extra time it takes to make the product work for the practice. And I think that's not true. I think doctors pay for value. And if doctors realize that they have statistically a 73% chance of failure, that they'll spend a little bit more money so they don't have that failure. They'll reduce that risk of failure by implementing it the right way. Now, certain doctors are just going to, they're going to want to have to go after the best price and the cheapest price. And certain ones won't have failures. But the 73%, call it non-success rate, we call it failure rate. 1 year after buying the system, the doctor still can't really use it effectively. Why buy it? Why spend the money doing that if you're not going to be successful?
Do you see any difference in how the manufacturer conducts implementation as opposed to a VAR?
If they are a local VAR, I see that they spend a lot more time with the practice because they're local there. They can drive over, talk to the doctor. They work through the processes a little bit more than the traditional national base vendor who's just really selling the product, spending a couple hours and then leaving. Maybe 20 hours, 40 hours, whatever it takes. I think it's all about the follow-up. Who comes into the practice 2 days after installation or after go-live to see how things are going? Local VARs can do that. They can come back in multiple times. But if you're buying a product where the vendor's going to come in, install and train, and then maybe they're just 1 day during go-live, what happens 2 weeks later? Or when an employee quits and you have to hire a new employee, how does that person get retrained on your new policies and procedures? So I think a local VAR potentially can provide a lot better support. But again, that's where you have to ask the right questions. How many hours do you spend looking at workflow and workflow optimization? And 30 days after, 60 days after, 90 days after, is somebody coming back in to analyze my practice to make sure I'm optimizing the use of the software with my business processes? That shows success, is when somebody's reviewing it ongoing to fine-tune the process of using the product. And I think the difficulty is if you're talking to a salesperson, most salespeople understand how to sell the product. They don't have as strong a knowledge traditionally on the implementation process. So you may have to ask the salespeople to talk to their implementation team and to find out, again, will the configuration and the training be customized the way I want to run my practice? In other words, will the training be built around the way we do things?
That's excellent advice, to talk with the implementation team as well as the sales team.
There's a way of determining how much customization you really want out there to the product. And really, it's not customizing the software product, it's customizing how you use it.
How often do you think a doctor needs to refresh the implementation and get some new knowledge in the office?
So I think it really depends on how often the software is updated. But I think there needs to be more communication between the new user of a software product and, I want to call them older users of the software, but experienced users. Online chats between multiple doctors' practices that are using the same product. Ongoing communication between practices, maybe in different regions that use the same product.
Any parting words for the doctors out there?
I think the bottom line is we have found, and people have always reminded us of this, that functionality is not the only part. It's functionality. The company has to survive. The usability has to be there. But I think now implementation, which again is installation, configuration, training, and follow-up, needs to be one of the highest points to be successful. You can buy a great product that's going to sit on your computer, but if no one ever uses it, it's never successful to that organization. So you may buy the right product, but implementation will either make it work for you or will break you if it's not done effectively for the individual practice.
Mark Anderson, AC Group, thank you very much for being with us today.